How's it going, folks? Stu here. Remember Florian Zeller's The Father with Anthony Hopkins that came and just sort of ruined us all? Well, he's back again with a new one called The Son. It's the next one in his trilogy of plays, which he's adapting into films, and it stars Hugh Jackman, Laura Dern, and Vanessa Kirby, which is already a good little tick list of actors that are going to make me want to watch a film. There's no way that this could possibly not be a great film. Right? So The Son, written and directed by Florian Zeller, is the story of a son that is depressed and a family's response to it. A father's response, a mother's response, the world's response to someone being depressed. And if you can't sense by my tone, it is a film which doesn't seem to understand how to explore that in any shape, way or form. Because much like my first attempt at baking a Victoria sponge at the age of 10, this thing is a hot mess which shouldn't really have ever been allowed in the oven to begin with. It is an endurance test in lazy, messy storytelling that I think severely undermines its, I believe, genuine heart and care that it wants to approach this very tricky, sensitive topic with. And that's all the more infuriating given how creatively Zeller's previous film, The Father, was able to attack and approach another sensitive topic in dementia within an old father. That film had a really distinct and satisfying way of pulling out its emotional themes through some really interesting abstract film work. It's a film which uses its medium really interestingly to mine its thematic work. And here in The Son, it's like Zeller just forgot how to do anything interesting and was like, just pull a camera out and film Hugh Jackman for a bit. There's really nothing in this film that does anything anywhere near as creative or interesting as some of the stuff that he was doing with The Father. And listen, it's a different film to The Father, right? So I don't want to suggest that just the lack of creative stuff itself is the film's biggest problem. It's rather that if you're going to take away all of those interesting elements of your film and leave just people talking in rooms, you better hope that you've got good stuff to do there anyway to make that engaging. He doesn't at any point have that stuff. It is a film which establishes that there is a depressed boy, that there is a dad that is sad about his son being depressed, that doesn't quite understand how to deal with his son being depressed, and then just has them say and do that stuff for 2 hours. It does flirt with the occasional moment of emotional depth in the film. There are certainly scenes which attempt, I think, to weave in new layers of depth to the characters, but it never knows how to really land that. It always ends up coming back to these very obvious, clear and surface level ruminations on depression and on what depression does to people around people that are depressed, which feels all the more infuriating and frustrating when you are dealing with something as complex and as nuanced as human depression, something which is experienced differently by different people that are affected by it. The performances are pretty serviceable overall. Hugh Jackman's good. We know Hugh Jackman's good. We know he can do emotional performances. This is an emotional performance. It does feel a lot like a very one-note performance, a very one-note character that keeps coming back to these same sort of big crescendos in emotion. He cries a lot and he shouts a lot, and he also doesn't cry and doesn't shout, which is emotionally complex. Laura Dern's fine in the film. Doesn't have a lot to work with, but she's doing fine because she's Laura Dern and we love her. Vanessa Kirby has some good stuff in the film. Anthony Hopkins pops up and is Anthony Hopkins. He's good. We know he's good. The adult actors in the film, I think, are doing the best work here. Zen McGrath's performance as the son here, though, is dire. If you're gonna do what this film's doing, right? And if you're gonna put so much weight on the performances to unlock the complex emotions of your characters, you better believe you need a good performance to do it. But McGrath's performance here as the son is so devoid of any actual genuine nuance and talent that it completely unravels every scene that he's in. It is a performance which thinks it can ride off of either having tears in his eyes or B, just looking so bored with everything that's going on. And listen, it is obvious why an actor would go for those two things when attempting to display depression on film. But that is exactly why it's so frustrating and, dare I say, problematic to do that as a performer when you're trying to mine something as nuanced and complex as this. There isn't a single moment in this film where I believed this character. which is a problem. Every single moment feels like an actor being given a script and said, just like, do it, just depressed, just be depressed. You know how every scene is going to go. Every scene in this film is going to be Hugh Jackman going, you're fine, right? And then the kid going, yeah. And then 5 minutes later, they're both crying and screaming at each other. Rinse and repeat for 2 hours, which means that with every scene that passes in this film, I just, A, felt its runtime. Good God, I felt its runtime. And B, I was just losing interest and losing the want to care for these characters. And I'm sure I don't need to explain why that's a problem for your film involving depression. But it's also a film which I think feels incredibly unsure of its perspective in a way which I suppose defending this film you'd say, hey, that's because there are multiple perspectives here, and it's a film which is trying to show that there are different perspectives to these things. And even if we did assume for a second that the film was intentionally distracted by the different perspectives of its characters, it doesn't balance those well at all at any point. It feels like it's a film which forgets its characters whilst it's looking at other characters. And the layers that it does attempt to weave in that I mentioned before were fleeting flirts with emotional depth always feel like they end up getting explained to us as a viewer anyway. Like, for instance, there's a thread in the film between Hugh Jackman and his father, played by Anthony Hopkins, which the film wants to suggest is a reason for Hugh Jackman's emotional response to his own son's depression. There's an admittedly, on paper, interesting thread here about fathers sort of replicating the things that their own fathers were doing when they were trying so hard to avoid being that father. That's a sort of interesting thread which I thought would have added more to this film, would have sort of added layers to the characters and made it a little bit more fleshed out and three-dimensional. The problem is the film does that and then immediately sort of tells you it's doing that. Which is not a fun thing to have done to you as an audience, and just assumes that you aren't intelligent enough to just get that from the performances, which is, again, the central sort of dilemma I have with this film and frustration I have with this film. If you're a film which is going to strip back all of the interesting creative flair that you had in the previous one, like The Father, and rely so heavily on performances to drive your film, why are you not letting the performances speak for themselves? Why do you have a screenplay which feels like it needs to shove things down our throats as a viewer? It's incredibly insulting to watch that as a viewer, but also incredibly belittling to the very real and serious topic you're trying to explore. And I'm genuinely fascinated by the fact that at this point, Florian Zeller has been able to do two seemingly polar opposite approaches to very difficult topics. I borderline can't quite believe this is the same filmmaker. It's that different and that poor. Listen, I gotta stop chatting here because I could talk for a long time about the things I didn't like about this film, and I don't want to keep you too long. So what about you guys? Have you caught The Father? Did you see it at the film festival? Have you seen it elsewhere in the year? Love to know what you thought about it in comments down below. Let me know. And if you enjoyed this video and you want to see me talk about more shit, go ahead and click subscribe. Buttons down there means you won't miss any future reviews on the channel. Of course, my social links, my letterbox links, all down there as well if you want to go follow me on those. I'll see you guys soon for some more thoughts on more films, but until next time, I'm gonna go lock my doors and make sure the kid from this film never gets into my life again.